talk to you about something that I've been researching for a while now, something called, well, I'll get to what it's called, but it's about looking at really appreciating people's strengths as a way of helping to coach them to performance improvement and performance enhancement. Before I get to that, I want to talk to you about how I came to study this. I think that as researchers, we often study ourselves. We often study things that are meaningful to us, something that really resonates with us and explains an experience that we've had. And so I was always very curious about the fact that I always felt that against challenge, against times of adversity, that I was the most likely to get back up and keep going and keep moving. And it really helped me to achieve a great deal in terms of education and in terms of other experiences in life to really get over some significant hurdles. And I wondered, what is it about my experiences, about my world that has allowed me to have this skill, to have this ability to do this? And really what I feel that it is, it's the relationships that are around me. So it's not really about me, it's about having a set of relationships that I feel are with people who really understand me, who believe in me, who know where my strengths are, who know that how to encourage me and where to encourage me. So I wondered, okay, so this is a really powerful thing, this idea of having these types of relationships as a way to performance improvement. Is this something that can be moved into the workplace? So I developed a really intense interest in the idea of feedback. The idea of, can we use conversations, to an earlier speaker, can we use conversations, can we use dialogue, can we use ways of coaching and mentoring and encouraging one another, and what are the elements of those relationships that actually lead to performance improvement and performance enhancement? So the place that I'll start is by talking about a study that's quite 20 years old now, that was done by a few psychologists that were really interested in the same topic area, feedback. They did a meta-analysis where they looked at all studies on feedback that have been conducted to date and asked the question, is feedback effective? Does feedback lead to performance improvement? And they found that a third of the time, feedback does lead to performance improvement. But a third of the time, it leads to no change in performance, and a third of the time, it actually leads to a performance decrement, a decrease in performance. And that is the sign of the feedback, whether the feedback is positive or negative, is not relevant. So you can still have a performance decrement following positive feedback. Right, so we're now in the space where feedback is kind of, it's a bit random, right? Like it's only leading to performance improvement a third of the time. On average, it's doing nothing at all. So what's wrong? What's the problem here? What's broken? And the issue is, there are quite a few issues, but to capture some of the critical issues, the managers in the workplace hate giving it. It's a very difficult task. Think about a performance review and think about how you feel leading into a performance review, especially if you have to deliver some very difficult information. The employees really dislike receiving it, and this has been studied as well, the people's responses to feedback, and we know that it's a very difficult thing to receive. You often are quite anxious during the moment of receiving feedback, even if it is positive feedback. Often you're left not knowing what to do with the information. What do I do knowing, having been given this information now, how do I change my behavior? What are the things that I'm able to do? So we know that feedback left in the way that it's typically given is an ineffective process, right? So we have this problem. So the question becomes, are we able to find ways? Are we able to find ways of having this conversation, ways of improving the way we support and talk to one another that can improve the probability, that can improve the outcomes following feedback? One of the authors of the first study that I spoke about, where we determined this significant discrepancy between feedback and performance improvement, came up with a technique that he called Feedforward. Has anybody heard of this? The idea of Feedforward? Good. Okay, great. Thank you. Yeah, so the idea of Feedforward is simply that when we look back, there are lots of reasons why that's not helpful some of the time. Some of it is that it can cause, it's the wrong orientation. So now that I know that how things went over there, how do I take that information and project that into my future performance? It can also cause a negative emotional reaction, and we know that negative emotional reactions kind of deplete our problem-solving skills rather than increase the possibility to come up with solutions. So Avi Kluger came up with this idea, well, why don't we change the direction of the information? Right? We still might need to reflect on past behavior, but we also need to have conversations that are forward-looking and forward-thinking. The feed-forward technique is also rooted in a strengths-based paradigm. It's rooted in appreciative inquiry. So it's rooted in the idea that if we are able to find the things that we do well and the things that we can utilize to overcome challenge, the things that have worked for us in the past, are there ways in which we can project those types of strengths into the future? Not ignoring weaknesses, but really just trying to leverage the things that we already know lead to success. Right, so I'll walk you through the technique, and then I'll talk about a little bit of why it works, and I'll talk about some evidence that I have in terms of the studies I've been doing. So the feed-forward interview, these are the steps. The first is that there's an introduction. So now, the idea here is that we've been working with our employees over the course of the year, and we are often giving them feedback and discussing things that are happening on the job. Right? So we're working by that old axiom that when we sit down to have that conversation, there are no surprises here. So why are we revisiting these things? Right? At this moment in time, here's an opportunity. Here's an opportunity to have a conversation that is meaningful, that can lead to some real understanding and, if necessary, some performance change. So the idea is you sit down and you say, well, today, you know what we're going to do? Today, we're going to have a conversation where we talk about the last year, and we talk about the high points. Let's talk about a few things that really went bang on, that were fantastic, where you felt like you were doing everything that you should. That's where I want to focus today's conversation. And then you elicit some stories from them. So tell me a few stories. Tell me a few instances of the things that have gone really well this year. And they come up with a few examples and a few stories. And you look for some stories, or one story in particular, that really is aligned with their job and the organizational objectives. And you find a story that they would like to see repeated, something that they would like to see happen again. And then invite them to identify, to tell the whole story, of course, but identify the peak moment. What was the moment where you knew that this was a great thing, even before the results were known? So it's not about the results, it's not about having, closed a big deal, it's about the process that you're really trying to get into. And then when identifying that moment, what you're trying to do is to keep them talking about the things that really supported their success. What was happening? Who were you with? What were the what do you think were the things that allowed you to be so successful in that moment? Right? So you're really asking them to think through, what are the elements that support my success? What are the things in the world that really help me to do well? And in the end, you ask what is called the feed-forward question, which is, okay, so thank you for sharing that story. Now let's look to the year to come. In your planning for the year to come, do you have experiences that are taking you further away, or goals or ideas that are taking you further away or closer to that type of success? What's happening for you in the year to come? Can we leverage what we just talked about to project your plan and your goals for the coming year? And it creates a totally different conversation. Right? It creates an entirely different conversation. There are a few things that it does. It does two things for the individual. One of the things that it does is it helps them, and I've already alluded to this, to really remember the things that support their success. Right? This is what I'm good at. These are problems I can solve. Gives them some confidence, some self-efficacy around certain strengths and certain behaviors. It also, in terms of the individual, creates a cognitive discrepancy. So it helps them to see, well, here's where I am now, and here's where I want to be. And we know that cognitive discrepancies lead to behavior change. When people can really see, like, oh, you can see the distance, people will start to make movement. It does two things for the relationship. Right, so I'm really interested in this idea of creating supportive relationships and creating positive and helpful relationships within the workplace. It creates an experience where the manager now hears and knows something about the employee that they likely didn't know before. This is often the feedback that we get, that the manager's like, I actually didn't really understand everything that this person had done with regards to that outcome. So that was really helpful for me to know that. It also helps the manager understand the strengths of their employee. So now they know how to guide and how to coach and how to talk to that employee a little bit more. Provides a little bit of voice, as we heard in an earlier presentation, an opportunity to feel that for the employee to feel that they're a part of a process and for a manager to actually hear. And then finally, it creates psychological safety. Is familiarity with that term? Yeah, this is the idea that in the workplace, we are more willing to take risks. We're more willing to, there are all kinds of outcomes that are supported if I feel safe within this environment, if I feel like there's certain things I can do here. And if your manager understands you, it increases your psychological safety. It also creates a bit of a positive affective spiral where both people start to feel good about one another. So all of these things are what we've found can be created through these types of conversations. The way I've presented it is fairly rigid. You do these 4 steps. It needn't be so rigid, but something else we know from research is that managers aren't very good at having these conversations. So giving them a set of steps is actually a very useful tool, right? It gives them some structure to follow that can lead to positive outcomes. We've tested this in service environments where employees have very little control, very little autonomy over their work, because one of the things you're probably thinking, well, that's great for the person who can plan their own work schedule. Actually doesn't matter. So people who have very little autonomy over the type of work they do, we've seen success. We've tested this in a creative environment with professional services, and while they're skeptical, it actually does lead to performance outcomes according to the statistical testing. And finally, we're in the middle of testing this within a paramedic call center, because we believe there's some possibility that the relationships that are created can buffer some of the stress and the negative psychological effects of this type of work environment. So we continue to test other potential outcomes of these types of conversations. So I'm looking forward to being able to share additional support for this technique. But thank you very much for your attention.